My name is Lucy von Sturmer. I'm the founder and CEO of Creatives for Climate. We're the largest and most diverse nonprofit network of creatives dedicated to climate action, spanning more than 90 countries, over 6,000 direct members, and a fast-growing alliance of ethical agencies. And I'm excited to be here today to kick off with the provocation, can creativity play a role in tackling the climate crisis? But I think we all know that the real question that we're here to ask and answer is a little more complicated and nuanced than just can creativity play a role? It's how must businesses adapt, and can the mission-driven model scale without compromising on commercial success? Because I think that's the tension that many in this room hold and many in the sector certainly face. In my 5 years of building the Creatives for Climate network, I've spoken to countless leaders that, despite their best intentions, with full awareness of the climate emergency that we're in, they're beholden to short-term KPIs and just living and surviving, facing the real creative challenges that come with running a creative business, managing staff, hitting deadlines, the unrelenting pitch cycle. And so today, we want to confront that truth. And in the meantime, the climate crisis is only accelerating. 2024 was the hottest year on this planet. We're facing a 1 in 100 year natural disaster almost every other week. And we're living in what scientists are calling the 6th mass extinction. All of our lives and our livelihoods are at risk. We risk not giving a safe and livable world to our future generations, and there are many already suffering the dire consequences of this emergency. And I don't know about you, but I'm starting to feel a lack of urgency on this issue right now. So I think it's worth reminding ourselves what we're up against. And I know what some of you are thinking, well, we'll change our business when regulators demand it. And it is true, it is the role of governments to set the rules with which we operate. But business sets the pace of change, determining what's possible technologically, economically, and also culturally. And as you can see, the pace of business transformation in the creative sector is incredibly slow. And creativity is the cultural engine of business, informing and shaping our values and our beliefs, our desires, and also demand. And demand shapes markets. Markets influence policy and politics. So today we're here to confront that truth, that advertising, marketing, and PR, or the creative industries, are directly responsible for driving incessant consumption and growth, and also building legitimacy in the eyes of the public for some of the world's worst polluters. And yet this industry also possesses some of the very levers and tools that we desperately need to drive towards a sustainable and a livable future. So I want to take us back to 2019 when Extinction Rebellion issued this letter to the advertising industry, which directly was our inspiration for building the movement. In fact, we formed literally as a response to this. And so the letter read, advertising has helped promote high carbon lifestyles and hyperconsumption. If we are to survive, this must change rapidly. Basically saying, we're the problem. But it also called us in, as well as calling out the industry. It said, as mediators between the public and brands, the industry is uniquely capable of driving rapid behaviour change. And I love this, and should take the lead rather than be driven. So that's the invitation. This is the golden opportunity that we have. This is why we're having the conversation today. We have an opportunity to rewrite the future. Creativity can drive us to terrifying places, and it can also accelerate a sustainable and positive future. And ready or not, change is here. The landscape is changing. So The Hague has become the first city in the world to implement a public ban on all fossil fuel advertising. B-Lab recently enhanced its standards to take account for service emissions. So not just how agencies operate, but who they represent, their influence, and the emissions that they're responsible for in terms of the stories they tell and what they enable. And lastly, quite obviously, the movement of creatives and agencies willing to not only divest from the worst polluters, so oil and gas, but also actively commit to carving out new solutions is scaling rapidly. And so today, we're going to have those conversations. We're going to have conversations about how agency leaders that are making bold decisions within their businesses to adapt to this climate, how they're making their decisions, what's driving them, what new business models are emerging, and how challenges are rewriting the rulebook. And I've been incredibly excited to have the opportunity to curate the session. We're hearing from independent trailblazers, representatives from large holding groups, and also media companies. So before I hand it over to our esteemed panel, I just also want to stress that we're not here to agree on everything, but we are here to show that change is possible at every level, from the boardroom to the brief. So without further ado, I'd like to invite Tom Taper, Creators for Climate advisor and co-founder of Nice and Serious, to the stage to take it away.
Great. Should we all come up? Let's all get on stage. Let's keep it moving. Cool. They're on. Thank you. Looking all right? Is that stable? Great stuff. Thank you for that wonderful intro, Lucy, just setting the scene for us today. So, hello everyone, my name's Tom. I'm one of the co-founders and the CEO of Nice and Serious. We're a mission-driven creative agency that I've been running for nearly 2 decades now. And I am very proud to be an advisor for Creative for Climate and the Ethical Agency Alliance and everything that stands for. Now, you might ask, why, or is it fair for someone that runs an agency to be interviewing a group of panelists who are agencies themselves? Arguably, in some respects, we're competitors, but I think at a deeper level, I think the reason why we're all here today is because we all are very concerned and aware about the climate crisis, and we're all grappling with what we can do as individuals and as agencies to respond to that. So with me today, really happy to say that I'm joined by Lameya Chaudhury, who's the head of social impact and a client partner at Lucky Generals. I'm joined by Pam Noakes, who's the global sustainability director at M&C Saatchi, and I'm joined by Joss Ford, who's the founder and CEO of Enviral. So let's kick things off. So what I want you to do is a kind of like quick introduction. Let's go along the kind of line here. And what I want you to do is sort of just quickly outline your agency's mission and really the motivation that sits behind that mission. So Lameya, do you want to start?
Shall I go first?
Go for it.
Go for it. So we describe Lucky Generals as a creative company for people on a mission. And that mission isn't just about, I guess, creating bold, brilliant creative that cuts through culture and creates a conversation. It's also driving systemic change as well. Ever since our first brief 12 years ago, we worked with Stonewall and Paddy Power on Rainbow Laces to kind of tackle the issue of homophobia through football. We've humanized the issue of grief with Co-op Funeral Care. We've tackled issues such as sexual harassment within our industry through Time 2. And most recently with our work with Make My Money Matter, turning a really boring subject, pensions, and trying to educate the public about how greening them is probably the most effective way to kind of combat the climate crisis. So I guess for us, our motivation comes from making work that truly matters and work that doesn't just win attention, but also drives impact as well.
Pam, go for it.
Okay, so at M&C Saatchi, our mission is to help our clients create cultural power to fuel desire and drive and deliver brand growth. And we know that brands that are harnessing cultural power are winning. It's one of the biggest influences of growth, cultural relevance, and trust for brands. And we just released an AI-powered cultural power diagnostic tool for brands, which we use across private, NGO, and public sectors. But interestingly, for this conversation, I think the most successful brands don't just reflect culture, they help create it. And if around 75% of people across the globe think we need to address the climate crisis, then that should really be a key element of cultural power for every brand.
Thanks, Pam. Joss, over to you.
Hi, I'm Joss, and I'm fortunate enough to have found Enviral, and we're here to stop global yawning. Let's be totally honest, everything's a fucking snooze fest nowadays. Everything's just, ChatGPT prompts, and the world that we, kind of a bit like Ron Seal, Enviral, turning environmental messages viral was the initial motive. It's just a jargon-fueled, just same fest, isn't it? So we're trying to breathe creativity into stopping global yawning. And interestingly, our mission has slightly evolved over the last year. And I think we'll maybe talk about this. So our mission was to save the world from boring sustainability stories. But that word sustainability has become politicized, and it's our fault. let's be totally honest. And we didn't make the business case for it well enough. And so we're here to scale mission and margin for brands with heart now, opening up the book slightly and really, really putting sustainability into the business case.
Excellent. Love that. Stop global yawning, by the way. Lovely line. Okay, so we're kind of here today to explore the role creative industries can have in actually addressing the climate crisis. So could you just give me a sense of what one thing you think you've done as an agency or individual that's really moved the dial, that's having the biggest impact, in terms of climate change?
I go first again.
Go for it,
We're
yeah.
going to go down this little
Let's do the line.
Okay, we'll do the line. Okay. I'm going to cheat and say two things, because I think from work in the wild, for us, definitely make my money matter, because yes, we generated lots of awareness. It's always great to shock people out of apathy and create two potty-mouthed villains like Olivia Coalmine and Benedict Lumberjack, which got a lot of awareness, but it actually shifted behaviours. The likelihood of people to actually think and consider about having a green pension rose by 50%, and that for us is a win. It's not about vanity metrics for us. It's actually how do you move the dial and get people to actually consider new things. And it was a brilliant creative brief, because it's a really boring topic, and actually trying to find, and also there's a lot of green fatigue when it comes, like Josh was saying, in terms of trying to navigate all the jargon. It was such a brilliant opportunity to have a very simple call to action, because actually it's very difficult to have a climate brief that kind of has that baked into that strategy. But within Lucky Generals, I think we've been on a journey on our climate action, and I guess the first step was we divest from fossil fuels. We're doing that inherently already, but we kind of formalised that through joining Clean Creatives. But I guess mainly through the brilliant work that Lucy does to Creatives for Climate and creating spaces like the Ethical Agency Alliance, where you can meet and connect with other founders like yourselves, or people trying to kind of think about the collective impact we can do within the industry. Also, the anti-greenwashing training. I do say it's very dense and it's very long because it's 60 modules, but it's worth it. We rolled it out within our London and New York office, and from that, every single general within the agency now feels empowered and equipped to actually ask better questions, challenge the briefs more, and we're not waiting for sustainability brief anymore. We're actually having sustainable conversations with every brief that comes in our door, and I think that is from the education that we received.
Excellent. Pam?
So I'd like to kind of echo what you said, Lameya, which is, we've done some reductions in our scope 1 and 2 and air travel emissions. We've trained our teams in greenwashing and things, but the reason I joined the sector is, I think, because the biggest potential impact is in the conversations that we're having right now about the work that we do for our clients and how we help them on their decarbonisation journey. And so for me, the biggest thing is being part of these conversations and taking it away, not just from the usual suspects, but also out into some of the larger agency groups and non-mission driven agencies.
Thanks, Pam. Right, Joss, over to you.
Yeah, I don't know what my answer is going to be, so I'm going to say some words and something will pop out. But yeah, we're a B Corp, and because of that, we've got some really forward-leaning policies we're really, really proud of. Part of Creatives for Climate, Clean Creatives, loads of different initiatives. But why is it that marketing agencies exist? Well, we're just a bunch of humans with ideas, with a kind of a moral ambition and a process. And so I think that the biggest impact that we have is being a bit of a blueprint to the agency industry, because we just don't have the scale and size to have to cut through all of the red tape, and I can basically make some decisions and we just do it really quickly. And that looks like bringing our sustainability strategy and our business strategy together. So we have a sustainable business plan, which sounds really simple, but effectively it's to make money, do good, and be happy, and trying to mold those three things at the same time. And within that, we really look at what makes an employee happy, so that they can then do really good work for our clients. So what makes an employee happy? It's a sense of challenge. Well, I can tell you, positive impact space, there's lots of that. A sense of autonomy, and a sense of direction. And that sustainable business plan for the sense of direction is really, really important. But you can have all of those three things, but without fucking working with really good people and then working with a level of purpose, it all falls apart. So What we do is have a at what cost checker, which we've kind of open sourced for the whole agency industry on our website, which basically scores briefs. So basically gives us a number if we should say yes or maybe or no to something. And that means that we can work on that purpose-driven work with that sustainable business plan in mind.
Awesome, thanks guys. Okay, so we're sort of floating around lemon and herb in terms of spice, so let's start asking a few more probing questions now. Let's dial it up to medium. So I think most of us can agree, and I think we'll be there, that actually reducing the impact of our operations is important. We all know that, but we're small service-based companies, and I think where the industry is going at the moment is to start asking questions around service emissions. So not just what's the impact of our operations, but actually what's the impact of the ideas and the campaigns that we propagate and the behaviours that we change. So let's go. I'm going to go over to Pam first on this. Like, you know, you're part of a very big group with some really big clients that have got a big impact. How are M&C Saatchi responding to this idea of sort of serviced emissions and the impact?
Yeah, we're definitely at the beginning of our journey. And the place that we found most helpful to start was to look at it from a risk point of view. So looking at our entire client portfolio and asking some questions about it. So some of the questions we've been asking ourselves is, what's the risk that we could accidentally get involved in greenwashing? What's the risk that a sector could be banned and we'd suddenly have a big hole in our income that we'd have to plug? So for example, in France, they've banned fossil fuel advertising. What's the risk of climate litigation against service industry companies? And that's definitely on the rise. It's, big names such as McKinsey and Edelman are beginning to be named in lawsuits. What's the risk our people might not be happy, to Josh's point, or indeed the risk that other clients might not want to work with us, depending on who else is in our client roster. And these kind of help us make informed decisions about the kinds of RFIs that we bid for. We also have a screening process, so anything with a high environmental or social risk comes to me for analysis and then onto the group CEO for final decision about whether we bid for it or not. But then we've also started looking at some opportunities as well. So, you know, do we have clients with science-based targets? And if we do, we do. What's the role that we can play in helping them achieve those targets? We've got a client review form that poses questions that teams can ask their clients about their approach to sustainability and how marketing activities can help with this, even if it's not part of the core brief, as Lameya was talking about earlier. And then we've also gone through a process of embedding what we call conscious creativity into our cultural power platform, and that brings these kind of conversations to the sharp end of the creative process. And then at the other end of the scale, slightly less systematic, I guess, we're starting to measure the amount of revenue that we generate from what we call planet positive campaigns. It's our own definition and it's really not very scientific at all, but the idea is basically to help people see how valuable planet and people positive campaigns can be to our business. And then my dream is that we'd find some really great disruptor that really disrupts an industry, and that ends up, you know, one of our key clients, but not sure we're quite there yet.
Cool. Lots going on behind the scenes then. And like Josh, like, I mean, obviously you've got M&C Saatchi, a big global group. You're really a challenger in this industry. Do you have a harder line on this sort of stuff in terms of service? Would you ever work for a bigger, you know, higher polluting client if you thought they were trying to change? Where do you sit on it?
Yeah. I think the world has definitely changed in the last 2 years, hasn't it? Because effectively, we're all about scaling margin and mission. You know, without a margin, you have no mission. And no matter how independent you are and how many brilliant policies and what you want to do to try and shift the agency industry in total, without the work at, you know, proper budgets, how do you operate? How do you keep the lights on? We were talking about earlier, right? And I think the reality is that you know, if we are only working within communicating for brands in the echo chamber, how much impact are we actually having? And so we've got, I guess, 3 different types of clients. We have the kind of the deep green clients, the ecologies, the climate partners, the Greenpeaces of the world, the obvious organisations that are often in things like carbon removal or activism. Then you've kind of got the purpose-driven brands, typically lots of B Corps, like the Dry Robes or the Dash Waters of the world, who've got a mission, but effectively they're needing a communications agency, let's be totally honest, to sell more stuff, but at least they're doing it in the right way. And then we've got what we call credible brand-led business transformation, and that's the ticket, isn't it? That's the one that we all like to say, you know what, we're going to change them from within, and that's where it gets spicy. That's where the at-what cost check is really, really important. And to be honest, we don't work with that many companies in that space. And when we do work with them, it's typically on things like impact reports. But we've worked with High Street Bank, and I'm really, really proud of the work that we've done with them, because we worked with them around the COP26 times. Remember those times, the summer months of sustainability, and loads of investment, loads of innovation going on. And actually, they trusted experts, which was epic. And we brought a level of vulnerability into their messaging, which is actually still having a positive impact now. And ultimately, they've got lots of capital. We did a campaign. It released hundreds and hundreds of thousands of pounds into grassroots climate organisations around the country, and I don't see many B Corps who have got that money to do that, you know. And so I think that is good work. But we went through a 2-week process through the at-what cost checker to say, should we work on it, should we not? The team all, you know, put their thumbs up on it. One person put a maybe, and we took probably a 3. In the scale of 1 to 10 of activism, a 3 to maybe a 4. But working with, you know, Greenpeace, we've done some amazing work with them. We've probably taken a 9.5 to a 9.6. So what's more impactful right now? Probably taking a 3 to a 4, and that's what we're in.
And I'm just going to stay with you, just in the interest of time, quickly. But I mean, cutting to the chase, about can we scale mission-driven? Do you think being as mission-driven you are, does that actually I mean, let's be realistic. Does it stop you growing as fast as you would if you would just take any old brief?
That's the answer. Yes, it does. But at the same time, you know, without a margin, you have no mission. I genuinely believe without a mission, you have no margin either. So, you know, there's loads of clients that come to us directly. Don't have to go through pitch processes because of who we are and how we operate. And you know, there are brilliant organisations like Creators for Climate which have shaped that. We've done anti-greenwashing training within the studio, but there's also the matchmaking service that Creators for Climate have got, which is brilliant, where effectively, and we won some work from Climate Kick last year, did a full rebrand for them because of who we are. But at the same time, you know, we've turned down a dairy company this year. We turned down a very big organisation in the UAE, and that would have been really, really nice on the bottom line right now. I'm not going to lie.
Yeah, no, it's real. I mean, I feel it as well. You turn down that you make compromises, but you stand for something. But I mean, Lameya, obviously, Lucky Generals are a bigger agency. From your perspective, does being mission-driven restrict growth, or actually has it helped you focus and grow in other respects?
It's so baked into who we are in terms of a founding principle, social impact, that the idea that you have to choose between growth and being mission-driven, I think, is outdated. Yeah, I mean, obviously, if you just pick every client, you could just, the bottom line would be great, you know, would be brilliant. But I think the businesses that are going to thrive now are the ones that are building resilience through sustainability and inclusion and future-proofing it, as you were saying, and not treating them as a side hustle, kind of disparate little brief, actually baking it into the full creative brief as a whole. I guess the question we're asking in 2025 of our clients is, did you really fucking mean it? You know, that's provocation, because I think the bar is really, really low for the last few years when it comes to inclusion, when it comes to sustainability. It's really easy to have a net zero target and have it buried in a website and not revisit it and kind of, you know, it's not being surfaced anymore. And I think we're not interested in those clients that aren't actually dedicated to that. We want to be working with the clients that are forward thinking, they are progressive, and that they have the belly in their fires to actually go for a brighter, more positive future. So that is something that it's interesting, because we've been on a journey as Lucky Generals, because we started off as an indie agency, and obviously we're part of TBWA and part of a bigger collective. So we kind of almost straddle both sides of the coin. It should be kind of in the middle between you guys. And it's not easy, but I think, you know, we say no to a lot of clients rather than say yes. And in fact, famously, when Lucky's started, and opened agency doors, we got offered an obscene amount of money through a payday loan company. Like, it would have been an amazing first quarter for the business. The founders all said no, and we took on Rainbow Laces that generated no revenue at all, but we believed in the work, and the work was good, and it brought creative opportunities, unlocked greater conversations, and started a movement. So I think you have to just believe in the work that you put out there in the world.
Yeah, great. Well, let's stay with you for a second. We're notching it up to hot on the Nando's scale.
You're going to go spicy.
Yeah, we can't.
We're not in the mango and lime area anymore. You're going to go full on. Or chili spice.
Exactly. So, but let's talk about contradictions as well, because I think I would agree. I think Lucky's has probably done some of the most impactful activist work I've seen, and I mean that genuinely. But I know you also work with an airline. Albeit a very.
Please don't crucify me in this room.
Albeit a very progressive
I'm very
one.
transparent that we do work with an airline.
Yeah. But so how do you know? But it's the real business question, and there are so many people in this audience that will feel that tension. So how do you grapple with it?
Yeah.
And is that just part of running a bigger business? Is it a sacrifice or just being realistic? How do you grapple with it?
I think for us, in terms of that tension, it's a tension we don't shy away from. But we've said no to fossil fuel clients, and that's a line in the sand for us. But I guess working with an airline and the work that Virgin Atlantic does, they're an airline, with the See the World Differently brand platform. That's not just a fluffy PR tagline. They're an actual business that have built-in inclusion into the business strategy. And that's kind of, for us when we work with clients and bring them on board, it's progress over perfection, but it's also understanding if they've done the internal work and if there's the motivation for them to talk about sustainability, and they have done that in this space. And did they get into trouble for it? Yes, they did. But, at least you have a brand that is willing, in a moment where there's a lot of green hushing taking place, actually trying to make a conversation like sustainable aviation fuel something that reaches the public domain and not just something that is a B2B message, which was what they're advised to do. So for us, we're proud of the work that we do with Virgin Atlantic, but I appreciate there's different lines for different agencies. I think if you're an agency that wants to scale, we're based in London, New York as well. It's a difficult question because in the last 18 months we've been discussing how do you keep the agency lights on and take on briefs. But I think for us it's always been back to kind of, we're a creative company for people on a mission, and if we believe in our client's mission and they want to progress in a direction and we can influence them, then that's a winning formula for us.
No, I think it's a tension we all recognise, and especially at the moment, it's very, very hard out there at the moment from a business perspective. But Pam, I'm going to skip on to the next one. So I'm going to give you a dodge on that question. But I'm actually interested, we talked a lot about the role of agencies, but as we all know, we're totally beholden to the whims of clients so often. Do you think clients are getting away lightly in this discussion, or do you think clients have a bigger role in asking questions of agencies? Would that shift the dial further?
I think that would absolutely shift the dial further because, the clients have all the power, as you say. I think some clients are getting away in the conversation at the moment, but others aren't. So we, for example, have millions of pounds worth of client work that is dependent on our climate commitments and performance related to our science-based targets. And that's an initial screening question, not like a nice to have at the end, but it's also not a creative question, which I'd like it to be as well. But also in the UK, we have some clients that will not work with agencies that have clients in certain other sectors in the UK. And that's not just NGO clients. I think it's a really interesting development, but it's not happening very much, but there are some.
Can you give me the list of those?
No. Sadly not.
Well, thank you. That's very. Look, we've got a minute and 30 left, so you've got 30 seconds each. What I want you to do, imagine there's people in the room from the creative industries, from the climate sector. Kind of, in your opinion, what one thing can people do in the creative industry today to seriously shift the dial on climate? Realistically, if they can do one thing today, what would you say would be the most meaningful step they can take? And I'm going to start with Joss over there.
There's loads of brilliant organisations like Creators for Climate, so definitely look at those. But I would say get into the briefing process. Creatives need to be in the briefing process. Often briefs are just as bad for the planet than they are for your pocket. And I think is it like 1/3 of all briefs are miswritten. Therefore, it just goes into the ether. So creatives, get into the briefing process, bring sustainability into briefs, no matter where they are, and start talking about it rather than greenhushing.
Great. You can whoop, it's okay. Pam, over to you.
Getting creatives into the briefing process, I think you also need to get the sustainability teams into the briefing process as well. So a lot of kind of more sustainable products and services fail because they don't get the same love that other products get. And so give your sustainable products the same love that you give your unsustainable products.
Thank you. Lameya.
I think we need to start challenging the myth that climate work is boring and too complicated. If 50% of people don't understand sustainable messages, which is what Ipsos reported last month, I think that's indicative that that's on them, and it's not on them, it's on us. And I guess that's the challenge for us for not being bold and not being clear enough. So I think doing the right thing should not be seen as a creative constraint. It's a chance to make work that's more sharper, braver, and bolder. And I think that's a mind shift that we need to take.
Thank you so much, everyone. 10 seconds over. That's how you do it, okay? Right, so just a big thanks to Lucy and the team for Creatives for Climate. Thank you also to the team at Bellwethers for hosting this. Please give a big thank you to our panellists, and I'm going to hand over to Lucy. Thank you.
That was so perfect, and I hoped that the experience was like being a fly on the wall at the pub with a bunch of agency leaders sharing some of the real challenges and nuances. And I actually know and have seen a few other agency leaders in the audience today that I've had these conversations with and that have actually come to me, knock, 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 can we accept this brief, please? Give us ethical permission. We're struggling. So no one to hear, to learn from better than those at the forefront of change. So just to mix it up, I thought it would be interesting before we go to our next fireside chat to reflect on what's going to happen in a week, which is that it's the world's largest advertising festival. And a year or two back, we were there on La Croisette, terribly pronounced, talking to leaders about what's really holding back change. So I thought we could spice it up, watch a little video, and then be on to our next interview.
I'm Agent J. Well, Joshua Capo, and I'm with Creatives for Climate at Cannes Lions. And I'm on the lookout for brands, agencies, marketers who are being a little bit mythical with their sustainability goals. Yes, that's right, I am on the greenwash. Greenwashing is making yourself look good while doing the nasty underneath, basically.
Using sustainability topics to create the impression that a company, for example, is active in climate preserving activities when they're not.
Essentially, it's
They use a lot of green colors and say that they're more sustainable and recycling, but I don't think they are.
Well, I think greenwashing is a word that's been captured by people doing things that are purporting to be something but they're not.
I'm absolutely convinced that advertising agencies have to do it because we need proper storytelling to get the behavioral change that we so desperately need in society.
At the end of the day, we are only going to have healthy businesses if we have healthy societies and healthy planets. And business can play a big, big role in doing that. Governments can't do it alone, civil society can't do it alone. We're going to need businesses to engage in this agenda.
The creative industry is ready to talk about it very, very strongly. Sustainability is one of the two topics they're talking about, AI and sustainability.
Yes, we are very much around like how can we bring in everything from don't use your plastic water bottles.
Do you have an audit on the kinds of clients that you would represent in order to support them to grow? For example, fossil fuel clients?
That I'm not sure I can respond to.
Thank you so much. What's your stand on having an audit on the kinds of clients that agencies represent? So, for example, fossil fuel clients.
At the end of the day, how the agencies engage with their clients is for each individual agency to decide on what their approach is.
What's holding back change?
Money. I think, fear and greed are holding back change. And, that's all around people having short-term thinking of gain now, because who knows what tomorrow will bring, when we're actually responsible for making tomorrow. So, now you've heard the conversations, the responsibility is in your hands. Using our new tool, the Greenwash Swatch, you can identify greenwashing, snap a picture of it, and call it out on social media with the hashtag GreenwashWatch. The future is in your hands. Choose wisely.
$24, so excuse some of the low budget features, but yay! And that's an open source tool that's on our website. All right, for the next conversation, we're actually going to dive into the nitty gritty of how to drop your dirtiest client. So I'm really excited to have Maeve Cambell, Channel 4 news journalist and independent climate reporter, interview Julie Richards, who's the Director of Sustainability at The Guardian. So take it away.
I've got mine.
Oh,
I've got mine.
Gosh.
Hello everyone, nice to see you all. So I'm really excited to be here today. As Lucy said, I'm a climate journalist. I work mainly for Channel 4 News, write for Forbes. And I'm really excited because the next part of our session is going to be about the role of the media in the green transition, which is very much my bag, as it is Julie's. We're going to dive into Julie's work at The Guardian. So please invite her to the stage.
Thank you very much.
Hi, Julie.
Hi.
So, we've just heard from, creative agencies, big and small, about that very delicate balance, between the mission-driven model and the need for essentially commercial success. So, I want to talk to you because, I'm a journalist. I sit on the editorial side of the newsroom. You're at The Guardian, but you sit on the more kind of commercial and operational side as head of sustainability. So just explain to people, first of all, what the difference is between those two sides of the newsroom and kind of why it's so important to keep them separate.
Oh, yeah. So, my role is Sustainability Director at The Guardian. So I look after everything around our company commitments. So that's our emissions reduction targets, all of the work that we're doing to reduce our own impact on the environment, the influence that we try and have, in the wider kind of media industry, etc. I'm not a journalist. I have no influence over the journalism that we produce, our environmental reporting. In fact, I see my job as making sure that the company lives up to, all of the values and the information that is exposed through our journalism. So we have an absolutely fantastic environment team, probably one of the biggest in the world. Now, the breadth of our coverage is huge, breadth and depth. We publish about 6,000 pieces of environment reporting every year. So really, our readers who, consume that in sort of huge amounts really care about the environment and expect us as a business to act on the information that we're publishing. So, I see that as my role to make sure that the company is acting in the way that readers would expect from our journalism.
Yeah. So the editorial side is very kind of independent, but I suppose you influence each other in the sense that you both have the same mission.
Yeah, we have the same mission, and I would say I'm very much influenced by them, and I would check stuff with them, but equally they would come and just ask. I will not say that I influence the journalism in any way, but they'll ask for views, things that we're hearing more in the industry. What are we seeing in the market? What's our experience of, for example, different types of reporting or target setting or standards, because that's kind of useful for them to understand what it's like for companies who are having to implement these things. So, and we did a piece of work. We collaborated really closely with editorial on a biodiversity audit, for example. So a few years ago, one of our nature reporters was writing a lot about biodiversity targets and biodiversity positive commitments that companies were making, and really wanted to understand what is that like for a company, what does it even mean to measure your biodiversity. So we collaborated on a project and with some academics from the University of Oxford to do our first ever company biodiversity audit, and then sort of reported jointly on what we found.
Oh, interesting. So that's a real way that you guys have kind of worked together. I didn't know that. Okay, interesting. Was it Phoebe Weston?
It was, yeah.
She's the biodiversity reporter. I'm a big fan. So obviously we've just been talking about money, which is so important in the sense that kind of even at The Guardian, you need to sustain that amazing independent journalism, climate and otherwise. And that involves working with advertisers, it involves, working with brands. So, the big difference between you at The Guardian and many other newspapers is that you did actually put a ban on fossil fuel clients in 2020, I think. Tell us about kind of how that came about within a media environment, who signed it off, what were the obstacles?
So that came about, so that was early 2020, and if I sort of step back before that, so, we've got a very long history of environment reporting. We had done a lot of reporting about the role of fossil fuel companies, not just the fact that fossil fuels are the major cause of climate change, but also the role of fossil fuel companies in delaying climate action and actively sort of lobbying against climate action. And then in 2019, we did this sort of big campaign, which we called our sort of climate moment, where we really shifted or experimented really with shifting the tone of our own marketing. We'd been building this kind of reader revenue model for several years and really sort of trying to get a message across to readers that The Guardian, we really needed to sustain ourselves financially and we needed, their financial support to do that. And we were reaching a point where actually we sort of, got ourselves back to break even after quite a difficult financial period before that. And then we really felt that we needed to shift the messaging, and it wasn't just about, it helps save us because we're, we're sort of in danger of going out of business, but actually tell people more about what we stand for. So we did this big campaign in 2019 that we called the Climate Moment, where we kind of really set out for our readers, like, what do we stand for on the environment? The fact that it is front and centre, both like of our reporting and also how we act as a business. And that was really successful, and it was like a really powerful moment. It generated a lot of revenue, and it really, I think, shifted people's mindsets to see that actually we, as news organisations, we're usually quite reluctant to talk about ourselves. Yeah. And we still are, but we sort of try and do that in the right moments. It can be very powerful. Yeah. And so on the back of that, we really had to think about, okay, what does this mean for us? Like, what are the sort of actual decisions that we should take and that will sort of show people that we're, actually taking this seriously. Yeah, and
kind of practicing what you preach.
Exactly, yeah. And stopping taking fossil fuel clients felt like a really sort of important step.
And so, we spoke about this again in the last panel a little bit, but for you guys, what defines a fossil fuel client? I know that you still work with some airlines and some cars. What is a fossil fuel client?
So a fossil fuel client is a fossil fuel extractor, so an oil and gas company, for example. So even if the advertising that they wanted to do was about, let's say, renewables, or maybe about some sort of, social programs they were running, we would still class that as a fossil fuel client, and we wouldn't do that. And actually, those are some of the things that were sort of felt quite borderline, but we've sort of felt like we were participating potentially in sort of greenwashing for those clients by helping them sort of portray a sort of more positive image. We do still work with airlines, we do still work with car companies, etc. It's like as Lameya said, you have to draw a line somewhere. We're transparent about that. And when we made the fossil fuel, the decision to ban fossil fuels, we were quite clear as to why we did that. And we said that we saw those companies as just significantly different because of the impact that fossil fuels have on emissions, but also because of the role that those companies have played. And we felt that was a sort of line in the sand for us. Yeah. And interestingly, like for several years before that, our the Scott Trust Endowment, the sort of endowment fund that sort of supports The Guardian, had already divested from, or made a decision to divest from fossil fuels, and was in the process of doing that. So again, it was sort of coherent with other decisions that we had made.
Following their lead. Yeah. And how much money, were you making from fossil fuel clients, and how have you replaced that revenue?
So, the advertising team will sort of say the impact is in the millions, over sort of multiple years. I guess the reason why I think we were able to do it was because we thought about our business as a whole and how stopping taking that advertising from those clients could actually strengthen other parts of our business. So we'd seen from the Climate Moment the impact that we could have with readers directly. That was and still is like the growth engine of our business. And actually, one of the kind of key drivers, sort of people involved, was the head of our reader revenue team, Anna Bateson, who's actually now our CEO. who was like, you know, a real kind of advocate for this at the sort of exec level and pushing for it. So, I mean, I don't think that we could say that we absolutely kind of balanced revenue lost with reader revenue sort of in a given year, but we saw it as part of a shift towards a more reader-funded model based on trust, our values, you know, the sense that our readers have of us as a brand and what we stand for.
Yeah.
And we felt that it was, you know, over the long term, that it was a beneficial move commercially.
It's quite unique, isn't it, The Guardian's approach to that reader funding? Because I always think about it, obviously, every time I go on it online, I'm sure you guys know the feeling. It's like, do you want to donate?
You should.
But there isn't... You should. There we go. A free plug. But it's not like the Times or where there's a paywall. You literally can't see the article. So I suppose, it's that difference between, it feels like it's a relationship with the reader to do with trust, which is based on the quality of your journalism, but also what's happening behind the scenes on kind of the commercial side.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's quite incredible. I still find it quite incredible to think that we now have 1.3 million people who are in a paying relationship with The Guardian. Some of them are paying for a specific product, maybe a newspaper subscription, a subscription to our premium app, so specific features. But actually, all of the journalism that people are consuming through our products, you can read it for free on the website.
Yeah.
So we've got 1.3 million people who are giving us money because there's something else that they value about The Guardian. And that really is down to the type of company that we are, the fact that we are independent, quality news. We've got a unique voice in the media landscape, in the UK, but also globally. And because because of the ethics and the values that we try and live up to in our business. Not saying that we always get it right, but I think we're a lot more transparent about that than I think a lot of media companies are, and we really try and tell that story to people.
So that brings me on nicely to other kind of publishers, because I think, I'd be interested to hear from you what you think, whether there has been a ripple effect, and, get some intel about other publishers. We all know the big names, the big newspapers in the UK. What are they doing? Do you know? Do you have any stories?
Do I?
Asking for a friend.
Yeah. Look, I think that other publishers, for most of them, the climate is not such a big issue. Some of them, I would say, it's an issue that actually they have a quite different stance on. I would say more divisive stance, different positions on, on net zero, for example. I have spoken to other people in senior positions at other quality newspapers who have asked me about the fossil fuel decision and who've been thinking about it.
Yeah.
And saying, oh, it's quite difficult commercially because it's probably more revenue to give up than we were getting.
Yeah.
And I suppose my response to them was, I get that. I get that it's a difficult commercial decision, but equally, if you were a news organisation that has good climate reporting, which they do, you have your own net zero emissions reduction targets, etc. You are reporting on the fact that climate change is a massive risk to our future economic prosperity, and you believe in that, and you know that that's true, and you stand behind your journalism. Yet at the same time, you are promoting fossil fuel companies through advertising. I just those two things cannot
very incongruous.
Cannot both be true. You can't believe in both of those things, and I guess that's the same for a lot of agencies as well. Most agencies and big groups. Now everyone has their own net zero targets, emissions reduction targets.
Yep.
So I think you have to weigh that and go, okay, but how can we also believe that promoting companies that are actively working against those interests that we all have, how can that be consistent with our kind of company approach?
Yeah. And do you feel like you got some good reception from the senior person at that newspaper?
I mean, they haven't banned fossil fuel advertising.
Oh well,
yet.
okay. If they do, well, we don't know who it is.
I'll
But,
take
we
credit.
can only speculate.
Yeah.
So we've spoken a lot about this big decision, to ban fossil fuels, which is a few years ago now. Tell us about kind of what else goes on behind the scenes at The Guardian, because obviously from the outside in, it's very, it's like the environment
holier
first.
holier than now.
Holier than now, slightly. I know that you also lead as head of sustainability on kind of staff engagement and training and internally, and also speaking to journalists. How do you see your role as kind of shaping?
Yeah, interesting. I mean, I see my role very much as sort of trying to maximise the impact that the Guardian can have. You know, like every company in any industry, we want to minimise the the direct impact that we have on the negative impact that we have on the environment. But I think we have a massive platform to have a positive impact. So one of the big things that we're doing at the moment is climate literacy training. We've developed our own course in-house using Guardian journalism. We've rolled that out so far to our entire advertising team. We've got everyone sort of certified. That has been really impactful. I think it's really shown me that even for people who work in a company like ours, the amount of news that there is, the amount of information is quite overwhelming. And so presenting something with, presenting people with a kind of coherent training that really just reinforces the facts, helps them understand what needs to happen, and crucially sort of what changes they can make or what actions they can take in their own role is hugely impactful. And then that's the thing that we sort of hope to try and take out to the wider industry, because I think that just that education piece and just reminding people how important this is, I think is
so
really
climate
crucial.
literacy training would essentially be kind of like climate 101, like this is what net zero means, this is what this is what 1.5 is.
Yeah, but also like what are the solutions? Like what actually needs to change? I think there's so many conflicting messages and people kind of, you can get lost in the information of like, how important is it to like recycle my plastic at home versus, the entire world shifting away from fossil fuels?
Yeah.
It's like you can...
Yeah, absolutely. I imagine that's also something that is reflected a lot on the agency side as well, because I'm always talking about, with peers and colleagues, this thing about the individual versus the collective or versus the systems and what we should be working on more. Yeah. And I suppose when you're working with brands, you're maybe thinking more about the individual, but obviously I'm going to steal your line, Joss. Famously, for anyone who doesn't know in this room, it was actually BP who coined the phrase carbon footprint because they wanted to blame it on you and your little footprint instead of their huge impact. So I think, it's interesting, this kind of individual versus collective, and I can see why that would roll out quite well across the newsroom. Should we talk about this kind of relationship between agencies and media just before we finish?
Yeah. Got this flashing red light.
One last question. Just about kind of, we had someone, from Saatchi talking about kind of they're more at like the beginning of their journey, looking at risk. What do you think the relationship there is between the media and what would you advise to anyone in the room?
I mean, it's hard to give, I don't want to sort of, I think every company has to sort of figure out what's going to work for them. I would say, and I liked the sort of frankness on the panel before, we don't make decisions like stopping taking fossil fuel clients because you think it's going to make you money, because it won't, right? Sadly, loads of other clients do not come running to you saying, oh, great, now we can work with you. But I think you have to see it in the round as to like, what type of business are you? And as all the other panelists talked about before, it's like you sort of craft your own company identity around that. And that is what people will buy. So for us, if we were suddenly to reverse our decision and say, oh yeah, we'll take fossil fuel advertising, well, that would send a very sort of contradictory signal about the type of, the type of company we are.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah. And one last final just what is one piece of advice to the room? We've got lots of people working kind of advertising, marketing, content. What would be like your one takeaway?
I would say don't feel powerless. I think in general we all have this feeling that like all of these big existential sort of forces are working out of our control and there's nothing we can do. I don't think that's true. I think we can all make some change somehow.
Positive note to end on. Thank you so much, everyone. Please give Julie a round of applause.
So much. Such a brilliant in-hand job, and I hope that you all feel inspired to take action. And Julie for sharing all those lessons. I just want to summarize very shortly that I'm a creative and that I find it a very inconvenient truth, because I love this craft, and I know many of us do, that we're in a climate emergency that's made responsible by this industry. And so yet I want to leave you with the message that the industry is full of brilliant and passionate creators who have the right skills to imagine design and mobilize momentum towards new futures. We must engage this industry specifically in paving that forward. And I also want to let you know that 90% of the public want governments to take more action on climate. And so that is our kind of permission to drive forward with more ambition. So lastly, at Creators for Climate, we're offering 3 pathways that meet the moment. One for individuals, so joining our Creative Climate Hub, it's free to join. There's a very simple commitment that defines what it means to be a creative for climate. Everything from solutions-oriented storytelling, recognizing that this crisis is intersectional, to divesting your creativity from the world's worst polluters. We've got a pathway for agencies to join and take action. But lastly, and most relevant for this conversation, we also offer a free matchmaking service for mission-aligned brands. We want to draw a red line and make it more attractive for agencies that are taking action on climate to be rewarded for that behavior, because there is an inherent dichotomy and inconsistency. If your company, of which there are 1,000, more than 1,000 publicly listed companies have made a vague net zero claim, you can't really be working with service providers that are at the same time undermining that work. Or for example, what if your business is in coffee or cocoa and your service provider is actively supporting an industry which is also posing an existential threat to your supply chain? So we're offering a free matchmaking service. We want to build the business case and move the money. So you're welcome to contact us. And we know what needs to stop. Now it's about building the pathways, the incentives for doing the right thing, and supporting non-profits like Creators for Climate to continue to exist and thrive. So last minute, and then we're off. Thank you, everybody here today. Thank you to all our amazing speakers.